Some characters in this narrative may be fictionalized, but the story is rooted in real events that transpired during World War II. In the spring of 1945, as American forces engaged in fierce battles in the Pacific, an astonishing discovery was made over Okinawa. A kamikaze bomb shot down in an audacious mission revealed a chilling secret. Inside the craft, American pilots found a man sealed within, a stark testament to the desperate measures taken by Japan in the face of impending defeat. This revelation not only sheds light on the harrowing realities of war, but also invites us to consider the human stories behind such monumental events. Subscribe to our channel for unparalleled access to well-researched facts, rare perspectives, and clear explanations of historical events. By joining us, you'll stay informed with regular uploads that delve into the complex narratives that have shaped our world. Don't miss out on the opportunity to deepen your understanding of history. Subscribe today. The sun dipped low over Okinawa on the afternoon of April 12, 1945. Casting elongated shadows across the airfield where American pilots bustled about, their faces etched with the fatigue that comes from relentless combat. The relentless assault of kamikaze attacks had become an all-too-familiar element of their daily lives. A sense of urgency hung in the air, underscored by the palpable tension of an impending confrontation, even as the island's lush beauty surrounded them. This day would mark a significant turning point in the war, not solely for the immediate tactical implications, but also for the human stories entwined within the machinery of conflict. When the alarm had sounded, a cacophony of engines filled the sky above the island. The pilots scrambled to their planes as warnings crackled over the intercom. They had been trained to expect the unexpected, yet the very sight of a plane careening towards their position instilled a surge of adrenaline that rendered them momentarily breathless. This particular aircraft, a Zero, executed its final maneuver with a terrifying grace before it plummeted into the ocean with a gory splash. The aftermath of the engagement revealed a somber reality. American crews had succeeded in their mission to intercept and destroy yet another kamikaze threat. Yet as debris floated ashore and the water settled, they were unprepared for the revelation that awaited them. As search teams navigated the wreckage, their attention was drawn to an object that bobbed gently in the waves, distinct from the rest of the flotsam. A dive team was dispatched to examine the remnants, and within moments a sense of disbelief swept through the ranks. They had indeed shot down a kamikaze aircraft, but inside the crumpled fuselage lay something unexpected. A human figure, sealed within the cockpit, lifeless yet hauntingly human. It was a stark reminder of the individual stories that were often eclipsed by the larger narrative of war. The pilot, a young man, bore the insignia of the Imperial Japanese Navy, a tragic testament to the grim realities of honor and duty on both sides of the conflict. As the body was retrieved and laid out for examination, questions swirled among the American personnel. Who was this man? What had driven him to undertake such a perilous mission? They knew little of the psychology that propelled these kamikaze pilots into the skies, driven by a mixture of desperation and a sense of duty. To their adversaries, these individuals had been painted as fanatical warriors, yet the reality was far more complex. The American pilots couldn't help but feel a wave of empathy wash over them as they contemplated the life and choices of this young man. In his final moments, he had made the ultimate sacrifice, embodying a blend of bravery and futility that resonated deeply with the values they held dear. In the days that followed, the pilot was identified as Ensign Matsuo Takahashi, a mere 22 years old. Newspaper articles back in the United States would glorify the success of the American efforts against the Japanese forces. Yet here, in this fleeting moment, the war personalizes itself in the face of unyielding violence. Takahashi's story unfurled slowly, revealing a background that was as rich and textured as the war-torn fabric of his homeland. Born in the coastal town of Yokohama, he had grown up amid the teachings of honor, loyalty, and sacrifice, the very tenets that drove young men like him to take to the skies in the face of overwhelming adversity. The American pilots gathered to share their thoughts, reflecting on the man who had become more than just an enemy figurehead. They noted the irony that while they had been fighting for freedom, another's struggle was encapsulated in the very act they had deemed suicidal. Their conversations were laced with an uncharacteristic poignancy, recognizing the shared humanity that transcended borders. They spoke of the families on both sides, the dreams deferred by war, and the dreams now extinguished that were tied to those who flew and died for their respective causes. This tragic encounter brought an unexpected weight to their mission in Okinawa as they began to see beyond the enemy lines they had drawn so fiercely. They acknowledged that, even in the throes of battle, there was an underlying current of mutual respect that could be felt, even if unspoken. The image of Takahashi lingered in their minds, and in many ways he became a symbol, not just of the enemy they were fighting, but of the broader human cost of war, young lives lost to the relentless tides of conflict, caught in an ocean of ideology and duty. In the weeks that followed, as the campaign in Okinawa escalated, the story of Ensign Matsuo Takahashi spread among the American troops, transforming from an anecdote of curiosity to an emblem of reflection. His fate became a call to recognize the individual cost of conflict, a haunting narrative woven into the larger tapestry of the Pacific War. The pilots would soar through the skies, their engines roaring, but each time they took to the air, they carried with them the weight of that one-man story. They flew not just for victory, but in honor of the countless lives, both friend and foe, caught in the turmoil of their time. As the sun set over Okinawa in early 1945, casting a golden hue over the remnants of the Pacific battlefront, American pilots regrouped at their makeshift airbase. The day had been fraught with tension. Their fighters had engaged in relentless skirmishes against a determined Japanese fleet. Among these encounters had been a starkly unexpected turn of events. In a remarkable act of defiance, a kamikaze plane had been shot down just as it appeared poised to wreak havoc among the American fleet. This downed aircraft, however, whispered secrets far beyond its metal shell. For inside it lay a living man, a story waiting to unfold amid a tapestry of war and sacrifice. The pilots, both seasoned and novice, gathered around the wreckage with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. They had been trained to expect destruction, to anticipate the end of life in the skies, yet the presence of a human being within the confines of this mangled plane sparked a mix of emotions that rippled through the group. Their mission had always revolved around survival and the protection of their comrades. They were warriors by necessity, but now confronted with the vulnerability of life, they felt a flicker of humanity stir in their hearts. Their eyes met, and a silent agreement formed among them. This was no longer about victory alone. In the stillness of that moment, the American pilots grasped the gulf that separated them not just from the enemy, but from the unfolding narrative of loss on both sides. The kamikaze pilot, now being extracted from the wreckage, embodied a paradox of heroism and despair. The practice of committing oneself to death for a cause echoed deeply within the American psyche, evoking images of their own fallen comrades. Yet the context of this man's actions revealed layers of desperation and duty, shaped by a culture steeped in honor. His presence was a reminder that war dehumanized, yet paradoxically illuminated the human condition. As medics approached, the pilot's condition became evident. Burns and lacerations told a harrowing story of his last moments in the air. The adrenaline-fueled chaos of the battle had given way to a chilling stillness, leaving only the sounds of distant artillery and the low murmurs of the onlooking pilots. Their minds raced with questions. What led this young man to such a fateful choice? Was he driven by loyalty, fear, or perhaps an indoctrinated belief that fueled his sacrifice? They were aware that every decision he made was not just his own, but was steeped in broader currents of national pride and personal sacrifice, potent themes that had engulfed entire generations. In the days that followed, the story of this kamikaze pilot spread throughout the ranks. Each retelling breathed life into the complexities of the conflict. The American pilots, now tasked not just with the act of war, but with the burden of understanding, began to reflect deeply on the implications of their own actions. They pondered the losses suffered by Japanese families, the similar hopes and dreams that had been extinguished by the fiery spectre of war. In a sense, they were compelled to bear witness to a tragedy that transcended the battlefield. The pilot had become a symbol of the futility of a conflict that pitted brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, under the guise of duty and honor. Moreover, the incident sparked conversations that rippled beyond immediate experiences, extending into the mess halls and the barracks where young men gathered to share food, laughter, and tales of home. No longer mere adversaries, the American pilots began to understand the shared humanity of those on the other side, the Japanese soldiers who, like them, were fighting for survival, for their families, and for a sense of belonging. They were not just targets in the sky, but reflections of the same struggles that had brought them to this faraway land, a realization that was both enlightening and burdensome. The examination of the kamikaze plane and its pilot also served as a crucible for the pilots themselves. Many found their convictions tested, their patriotic fervor shaken. They grappled with the implications of their role in the war, questioning the righteousness of their cause when faced with the stark reality of mortality. As they engaged in these discussions, they also began to see the contours of a larger narrative, a war that was not merely a clash of arms, but a conflict that wielded deep psychological weapons. The war had become a canvas upon which the triumphs and tragedies of the human spirit were painted in shades of blood, loss, and the desperate search for meaning. In the quiet moments, when the noise of the world faded, some of the American pilots began to write letters home, not just to share the events of their missions, but to express the profound changes they had experienced. They found solace in words, seeking to articulate the complexity of their emotions, grief for lives lost, empathy for enemies, and a longing for peace. These letters became echoes of their struggle to navigate an existence marked by violence and a yearning for connection. A testament to the fact that even in the harshest of times, the essence of humanity remained vibrant, a flicker of hope amid the shadows of war. As the sun dipped below the horizon on the evening of June 21st, 1945, the horizon of the Pacific Theater was cast in a juxtaposition of fading daylight and the encroaching shadows of conflict. The small island of Okinawa, crucial in the Allied push toward the Japanese home islands, was still echoing with the remnants of gunfire and the cries of those caught in a war that felt interminable. Among the chaos, American pilots had unwittingly become witnesses to a spectacle that would haunt their memories long after the final gun was silenced. A kamikaze bomb had been shot down, yet what lay inside was far more than just a weapon of destruction. It was a vivid reminder of the profound human cost of warfare. The wreckage was brought aboard the USS Bataan, a light aircraft carrier assigned to the Fifth Fleet. The flight deck buzzed with activity as sailors and officers gathered around the bomb-laden craft. It was a moment punctuated by a palpable tension, the kind that settled in the air when extraordinary events unfolded. As the aircraft was lifted and positioned for examination, a palpable silence engulfed the crowd. The pilots and crew members, seasoned in the theater of combat, were about to confront the grim reality of their enemy's desperation and fervor in this fight for survival. When the exterior of the bomb was opened, revealing its contents, an almost surreal shockwave rippled through the onlookers. There, nestled within the confines of the bombing apparatus, was the body of a young man, a Japanese pilot whose fate had been sealed in the name of honor and duty. Clad in his flight suit, he lay eerily peaceful, as if merely napping. His presence transformed what had been a simple act of warfare into an unsettling confrontation with the loss of life, regardless of allegiance. The young man's face was frozen in a stare that seemed to express a mixture of resolve and resignation, suggesting a depth of feeling that transcended the rigid framework of militaristic propaganda. Investigators would later learn that this pilot was not merely a pawn in the machinery of war, but a symbol of the profound sacrifice intimate to the kamikaze missions. The Japanese word kamikaze, translated to divine wind, hinted at the spirituality with which these young men approached their fatal missions. They were often deeply influenced by the samurai code of Bushido, which emphasized honor, loyalty, and the acceptance of death as a noble outcome in battle. Each of their flights was not just a mission, but a solemn rite carried out in fervent devotion to their homeland and their emperor. The revelation of the pilot's identity, however, would never reach the hearts of those who had lost their lives in the relentless conflict, as many families remained unaware of their loved ones' fates. Back in Japan, mothers held on to the hope that their sons would return home, not knowing they had embraced the ultimate sacrifice in a relentless cycle of patriotism and despair. The poignancy of this juxtaposition would resonate through history, shedding light on the shared humanity that transcended national lines even amid the brutality of war. As American pilots peered into the remnants of the kamikaze, they were forced to reconcile the hero portrayed in enemy propaganda with the human being they now confronted. The shared grief of the fallen, regardless of which flag they fought under, bore witness to the futility of war. Despite their training and the ethos of their own military, many began to ponder the narratives that framed their respective nations' struggles. What were they truly fighting for? The question lingered in the minds of many as they processed what it meant to engage in a conflict that had become so personal, yet so abstract. The discovery also prompted a wave of reflection among the American ranks about the burdens of duty. Each pilot had faced the specter of death, yet here lay proof of the ultimate price paid by another. As they returned to the cockpit, many would find it harder to dismiss the notion that valor could take many forms. In a world reduced to categorizations of enemy and ally, the stark reminder of individual sacrifice lingered long after the aircraft had been hauled away from the deck. The war in the Pacific would continue to rage, but for those pilots and crew members aboard the USS Bataan, their perspective had shifted. The young man, who had once seemed like an enemy to be vanquished, had instead become a mirror reflecting their own humanity. The act of war had turned adversaries into tragic figures, each bound by their own sense of duty and honor. These revelations would undoubtedly influence their conduct in subsequent engagements, imbuing their missions with a newfound sense of responsibility and a haunting sorrow for lives irrevocably altered by the tide of conflict. As the weeks unfolded, the campaign for Okinawa neared its conclusion. Still, the memory of the kamikaze pilot remained etched in the minds of those who had witnessed this grave encounter. It was a tale that would be retold, not just as a narrative of losses borne by two nations, but as an emblem of the broader human experience. One grounded in sacrifice, loyalty, and the profound cost of war that could never truly be reconciled in the annals of history. As the sun dipped below the horizon over Okinawa in the spring of 1945, the air was filled with an unsettling stillness, shattered only by the distant echoes of war. American pilots, having flown countless missions during the bitter struggle for the island, braced for yet another day of combat. However, the discovery of a downed kamikaze bomber was about to shift their focus, raising both curiosities and grave concerns. The wreckage, charred and distorted, lay partially submerged in the shallow waters near the beach, a testament to the desperation of the Japanese pilots who had willingly embraced their fate. As they approached the wreck, the American pilots were struck by the juxtaposition of the craft's twisted metal and the harrowing reality it represented. Once they began their investigation, it was evident that this was no ordinary aircraft. The bomb strapped to the craft was large enough to obliterate a sizable target, but it was the cockpit that would provide a deeper insight into the psyche of those who flew these missions. As the pilots meticulously pried open the mangled fuselage, the air thickened with the scent of gasoline and burnt metal. What lay inside would challenge their assumptions about duty, honor, and the nature of sacrifice. The sight of a man sealed within, lifeless and eerily still, was a jarring revelation. He was a soldier, body adorned with the insignia of a Navy pilot, clad in a flight suit that bore the scars of combat. His face, though obscured by soot, appeared peaceful, a stark contrast to the violent destruction that surrounded him. Among the pilots was Lieutenant Richard Tanner, a seasoned aviator who had witnessed death on both sides of the conflict. His heart felt heavy as he gazed upon the young man, not much older than his own brother back home. Tanner realized that this gesture of defiance, this final act of bravery, was rooted in a cultural ethos that he could only begin to fathom. For the Japanese, the kamikaze missions were not just military strategies. They were deeply intertwined with notions of honor and duty. To sacrifice oneself for the nation was to achieve a form of immortality, an ideal so foreign to the American mindset that it left Tanner grappling with the emotional weight of what he saw before him. The pilot's hands trembled as they rolled the soldier out of the wreckage, their thoughts drifting to the families they had left behind and the lives they hoped to protect. The discovery of the man forced them to confront the often abstract nature of warfare, where the enemy became a faceless entity, stripped of individuality. In this moment, confronting mortality, the line between victor and vanquished blurred, eliciting a profound sense of empathy. This was not merely a pilot from an opposing force. He was someone's son, someone's brother. In their grief, the American pilots found a shared humanity that transcended the battlefield, a haunting reminder of the conflict's tragic toll. As the debris was cleared away, the pilots continued to piece together the events leading to the crash. They analyzed the aircraft's structural damage and the remains of its payload. Historians would later speculate that this particular kamikaze mission was intended for a high-value American target, potentially the naval fleet anchored nearby. Instead, fate had intervened. A last-minute decision, a mechanical failure, or perhaps an act of divine providence had led to the downing of the bomber. Each what-if echoed in the minds of Tanner and his comrades, underscoring the fragile nature of survival in war. Moreover, they took note of the meticulously arranged personal effects found in the cockpit, a small photograph of a woman, a poem, and a handwritten letter, remnants of a life abruptly halted. These objects, now riddled with soot and salt water, told stories that transcended the conflict. Tanner's eyes lingered on the photograph, recognizing the soulful gaze of the young woman as a universal symbol of love and longing. It became painfully clear that the soldier's last thoughts may have drifted towards her as he executed his final mission. The symbolism of love in the face of duty revealed profound layers of sacrifice, illustrating how warfare could sever, yet also underline bonds of humanity. Driven by a mix of reverence and sorrow, Tanner's team made the decision to document their findings, ensuring that this young man's story would not fade into obscurity. They dedicated themselves to a solemn task of preserving his personal effects, intending to return them to the Japanese government for identification and burial. In a war characterized by dehumanization, this act sought to reaffirm the dignity of the fallen, a gesture of respect that transcended nationality. In a time of increasing brutality, the decision to honor the deceased spoke to a shared recognition of the sacrifices made by individuals on both sides. As they left the wreckage behind, Tanner and his comrades felt a profound shift within themselves. The experience would haunt them, intertwining their memories of victory with the poignant reminder that every triumph in war comes at a cost. The nameless soldier, confined within the metal carcass of his doomed aircraft, became more than a statistic in a great conflict. He emerged as a reminder of the individual stories that shaped the broader narrative of World War II. Each mission flown, each life lost, became an integral part of a tapestry woven from threads of both valor and tragedy. In their reflections on that fateful day, the pilots understood that they would carry the weight of this moment with them forever, shaping their perspectives as they navigated the challenges of the post-war world. As the initial shock of the discovery faded, the American pilots and intelligence officers faced an unsettling reality. The implications of what they had uncovered transcended the immediate battlefield. The sealed cockpit of the downed kamikaze aircraft was not merely a testament to Japan's increasingly desperate measures as the war dragged on. It was a complex symbol of sacrifice, indoctrination, and the human cost of warfare. The growing propensity for self-sacrifice among Japanese pilots was rooted in a cultural ethos deeply intertwined with notions of honor and duty, concepts that resonated powerfully at a time when the very notion of survival appeared futile to many. The pilots stood around the aircraft, exchanging furtive glances as they processed the grim tableau before them. Inside the cockpit lay the lifeless body of a man, one who had been prepared to surrender his life for his country's cause. His presence sparked a contemplation of the intense psychological conditioning that had propelled him into the cockpit of death. The kamikaze program, originating in the desperate hours of the Pacific War, was less a mere military strategy and more a profound manifestation of a national identity under siege. As the Allies advanced towards Japan, the resolve of the Japanese military grew more intense, and the decision to resort to suicide missions became entwined with a sense of nationalistic fervor. Among the American pilots, one in particular, Lieutenant John "Jack" Carter, felt the weight of this discovery more acutely than the others. Having served in various capacities across the Pacific, from the skies over Midway to the blood-soaked beaches of Tarawa, he was no stranger to the loss of life and the visceral horror of war. Yet, staring at the dead kamikaze pilot, he was struck by an unsettling empathy. This was not merely an enemy, this was a man whose dreams, fears, and aspirations, though foreign, had been extinguished in pursuit of a cause that had consumed him. Jack recalled the faces of his own comrades who had perished, and he felt the intricate web of humanity stretching across the divide of allegiance. The intelligence officers soon began to document their findings, collecting evidence that would contribute to a larger understanding of the Japanese war effort. They noted the pilot's uniform, meticulously adorned with insignia that told tales of valor and commitment. The heart-wrenching irony was palpable, that behind the guise of the enemy resided individuals much like themselves, individuals caught in the throes of a conflict where such distinctions were increasingly blurred. This tragic revelation compounded the already heavy burden of the war, as Jack found himself grappling not just with the culpability of combat, but with the broader implications of what had been lost in the fury of battle. As reports flowed back to command, the examination of the kamikaze aircraft became more than just a routine analysis. It transformed into a somber meditation on the nature of warfare. In an effort to make sense of the strategic significance, military analysts sought to unravel the psychological tactics that had led to such fanaticism. They pored over captured intelligence and the relics of downed pilots, leading to discussions about the effectiveness of their training programs, which had been deliberately designed to instill a sense of divine purpose and martyrdom. The pilot's last moments, in a forceful dive toward a target, embodied an adherence to these principles. The sheer determinism echoed through the ranks of American military planners contemplating their own tactics against such formidable resolve. The war was intensifying in the Pacific, with Okinawa serving as the last bastion of fierce resistance before the inevitable approach of Allied forces to the Japanese mainland. As April 1945 wore on, the island became a maelstrom of conflict, with American forces engaged in a brutal campaign to dislodge entrenched Japanese soldiers. The revelations about kamikaze tactics were critical, yet the personal stories of the pilots, those who chose such fateful paths, complicated a seemingly straightforward military strategy. They were not merely faceless adversaries, they were individuals sacrificed on an altar of national desperation. In the weeks that followed, the incident of the sealed cockpit haunted Jack. It flickered through his consciousness in quiet moments, and he found himself pondering the depths of human conviction. In conversations with his fellow pilots, he began to express his thoughts about the futility of the war, the senseless loss of life on both sides. His words were met with a mix of acceptance and resistance. The prevailing view was that survival necessitated a hardening of the heart against the tragedies of an enemy. Still, Jack's reflections ignited a dialogue about the moral implications of their actions and the price of victory, fostering a deeper understanding of the nuances of battle. Meanwhile, the campaign for Okinawa escalated, producing devastating casualties on both sides. The Americans pressed forward, determined to break the Japanese stronghold, yet each advance revealed the harrowing reality of war. The skies darkened with the smoke of battle, and the landscape became littered with remnants of both American and Japanese soldiers, each one a casualty of a greater conflict. Jack observed this destruction with a heavy heart, realizing that the sacrifice he had witnessed was not an isolated event, but rather part of a broader tapestry of human suffering woven through warfare. The sealed cockpit became more than a grim artifact. It was a reminder of the shared humanity that persisted even amidst the atrocities, as each death was a fracturing of a larger collective spirit. Ultimately, the impact of that single moment, the discovery of the kamikaze pilot, extended beyond the battlefield. It challenged the narrative of the enemy, forcing those who encountered it to reckon with their own beliefs about valor, sacrifice, and the nature of humanity in the crucible of war. As Jack and his fellow pilots continued their fight, they carried with them the weight of that understanding, forever altered by the silent testimony of a man who had given everything for his cause, a reflection of a world caught in the gears of a monumental struggle, where every life lost echoed with the haunting reminder of what it meant to be human in an age of war. As the American pilots examined the wreckage of the kamikaze bomb, a hushed reverence settled over the makeshift recovery area. This was no ordinary aircraft. It was a vessel of desperation and determination, a testament to the lengths to which the Japanese military was willing to go in the face of overwhelming odds. Each dent, each scorch mark, told a story of courage twisted into desperation. The pilots, tasked with evaluating the potential dangers of the enemy's tactics, were struck by an eerie sense of connection to the pilot who had met his fate within the crumpled fuselage. They were tasked not merely with assessing the physical components, but also with deciphering the profound implications of such a lethal mission. In the grim aftermath of the Pacific War, tales of kamikaze attacks had permeated the Allied consciousness, often painted with broad strokes of fanaticism. Yet as the pilots peered into the cockpit, they were confronted with a stark reality. The life of a man had been sealed within the metal shell. The pilot's remains, though tragically disfigured, evoked a sense of humanity that transcended the broader conflict. A photograph tucked into a cracked leather wallet revealed a young man with a wide smile, standing beside family. It was a powerful reminder that behind the enemy's image lay lives filled with hopes, dreams, and love, victims of a war that had ensnared them. This contrast was not lost on the pilots, who had themselves been steeped in the rhetoric of dehumanization, yet now stood at the nexus of life and death. The pilot's presence in the bomb made a profound statement about the nature of sacrifice. He had been imbued with the belief that his actions were noble, that he was serving his country, and in his mind, defending his people against what was perceived as an existential threat. The American pilots found themselves grappling with the duality of their role, as warriors and witnesses caught in a conflict that forced them to confront the profound sorrow inherent in humanity's capacity for destruction. As the recovery team began to document the discovery, a sense of urgency settled in. The pilot's identity needed to be confirmed, and any intelligence that could be gleaned from the wreckage was paramount. The pilots and ground crew worked swiftly, examining the flight records and mechanical components, those symbols of technological prowess that had driven both sides to the edge of their moral precipices. The kamikaze tactics, once thought to be the epitome of Japanese military zeal, were now recontextualized through the lens of this single instance, a young man's last desperate act. The pilots recognized the risk of underestimating the enemy's resolve, especially one so intricately tied to the fabric of their society. Yet, as they prepared to send their findings back to command, a deeper introspection began to emerge among the men. The war was ostensibly fought for freedom and democracy, yet the cost weighed heavily on their shoulders. The young pilot's death was now a symbol of the futility that war birthed, a reminder that each loss represented a thread pulled from the intricate tapestry of life. They found themselves yearning for an end to the cycle, a resolution that would honor the lives given and lost. Such reflections weighed heavily as they considered the mothers, fathers, and children who would mourn the man now forever enshrined as a mere statistic in the annals of combat. In the weeks that followed, the tales of the kamikaze pilot reverberated through the American forces stationed in the Pacific. Rumors circulated of a human face behind the enemy actions that had, until that point, been dismissed as mere fanaticism. This new understanding led to a nuanced shift in the personnel's approach to future engagements. As the war in the Pacific raged on, the desire for a resolution began to crystallize, challenging the prevailing sentiments of unyielding confrontation. The pilots began to share the story of the sealed man not just as a story of kill or be killed, but as a human tragedy that resonated with the sacrifices on their own side. The impact of this encounter stretched beyond the immediate context of the pilots. It influenced the broader narrative of reconciliation and remembrance that followed the war. In the years to come, stories of wartime encounters, such as the one experienced by the American pilots, would serve as building blocks in the evolution of understanding between former adversaries. They would pave the way for a collective memory that sought to honor the fallen on both sides, fostering a dialogue rooted in empathy instead of enmity. This transformation, seeded in the heart of a war, would become a cornerstone of post-war relations, invoking the hope that peace could be cultivated from the ashes of conflict. Ultimately, the lesson of the kamikaze pilot was not merely one of loss, but of the profound interconnectedness of humanity, even in the dire straits of war. The pilots returned to their missions with heavier hearts, but also with a new perspective. In examining the wreckage, they had uncovered not just the remnants of an enemy, but the intricacies of human experience that transcended borders and ideologies. It was a lesson that echoed long after the last shots were fired, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, compassion could break through the silence of despair, illuminating the path towards understanding and healing. As the sun rose over the Pacific, casting light on the debris of a war-torn Okinawa, American pilots were grappling with the reality of their newly discovered adversary. The kamikaze attacks had increased in ferocity, each strike a painful reminder of the desperation of the Japanese military. the air battle over Okinawa had escalated into a relentless struggle, not just for dominance, but for survival. The pilots, many of whom were young and far from home, found their resolve tested in ways they had not anticipated. They were about to confront the embodiment of that desperation, the human cost of warfare encapsulated within the wreckage of a downed bomber. The American intelligence unit was assembled hastily, a mix of green recruits and seasoned veterans, all drawn into the drama of the moment. As they gathered around the kamikaze plane, the initial shock of having discovered a man sealed inside began to give way to a more profound reflection on the nature of their conflict. The aircraft, with its charred wings and twisted fuselage, served as an altar of sacrifice, but the presence of the pilot sparked a conversation that transcended the immediate horrors of war. They discussed purpose and duty, the reasons that drove men to fly their planes into enemy ships, and the weight of the ideologies that propelled them into the sky. Amid the chaotic scene, an officer named Lieutenant James Caldwell took it upon himself to lead the examination. Caldwell had seen combat in the Pacific before, but had never encountered a scenario where the line between enemy and human became so starkly blurred. As he and his men pried open the wreckage, the sight of the young Japanese pilot, a mere boy, perhaps 18, reopened wounds of empathy within Caldwell's heart. This was not just an enemy, he was a fellow airman whose hopes and dreams had been swallowed by the depths of conflict. The pilot's lifeless eyes seemed to gaze back at them, urging them to ponder the futility of vengeance. Caldwell's men began to share stories of their own lives, moments when they had thought about home, or dreams they had nurtured before the shadows of war obscured them. Among the scattered debris, one pilot found an unburned letter, revealing the pilot's longing for family and an aversion to the war that was being waged in his name. The letter sparked a debate about the motivations behind such extreme actions and the propaganda that fueled them. The American pilots began to realize that while they were fighting for survival, the young man entombed in the wreckage had been driven by a sense of duty, one that resonated deeply, irrespective of allegiance. As they continued their examination, Caldwell felt an odd kinship with the dead pilot, recognizing that both were trapped in a larger narrative of conflict that ensnared countless individuals. The war had reshaped their destinies, and the boy's final act, a dramatic plunge into the depths of enemy territory, spoke to a tragic heroism born of a distorted sense of honor. This thought lingered uneasily in Caldwell's mind. How many others had been caught up in this same cycle? How many more lives would be irrevocably changed by the next misguided mission or the next fateful decision? Hours passed, and the sun began to dip toward the horizon, bathing the sight in a somber glow. The pilots stood in silent reverie, realizing that their victory over this particular kamikaze was a Pyrrhic one. It was not just an enemy downed, it was a human life extinguished. The image of the young pilot, rendered powerless against the might of his adversary, slowly morphed from a mere mark on a scorecard to a tapestry woven with threads of lost potential and stolen futures. Each pilot felt an awakening within, a realization that no victor emerges from war unscathed. Every triumph is shadowed by the specters of those who have fallen. In the days that followed, the kamikaze incident became an echo in the minds of the American pilots as they resumed their patrols over Okinawa. Some reported dreams haunted by the image of the young man, while others engaged in deeper conversations about the morality of their actions. The pilots began to question their definitions of heroism and sacrifice, grappling with the irony that their very survival hinged on the destruction of those who, like themselves, were simply following orders, as misguided as they may have been. The air war became less an abstract competition for aerial superiority, and more a complex tapestry of individual stories woven together by the inexorable threads of fate. Ultimately, the incident left an indelible mark on Caldwell and his comrades. It had reshaped their understanding of the war and the adversary they faced, pushing them to ponder the nuances of honor, duty, and the cost of victory. This shared moment of reflection served to humanize their enemy. The young pilot was not just a statistic, but a testament to the tragic saga of humanity caught in the throes of conflict. Each time they engaged in battle thereafter, a flicker of that shared humanity would surface, reminding them that in war, one's opponent is also a product of their circumstances, driven by dreams, fears, and a profound sense of belonging. As the war drew closer to its conclusion, the lessons learned in the quiet aftermath of that kamikaze incident would resonate long after the final gun had fallen silent. In the end, it was not merely the strategies and tactics that would define this conflict, but the stories of those who fought, their struggles, sacrifices, and the fragile threads that connected them, transcending borders and ideologies, uniting them in a shared, albeit tragic, human experience. The discovery of a kamikaze pilot sealed within a downed aircraft over Okinawa serves as a poignant reminder of the toll of warfare on the human spirit, transcending the boundaries of enemy lines. In an age when technological advancements were racing ahead, it is sobering to confront the profound sacrifices made by individuals driven by duty, honor, and the fierce loyalty of their nations. This event invites us to reflect on the complexities of war, where the enemy is often a mere face behind a uniform, and the narratives of bravery and despair intertwine in tragic fashion. As American pilots confronted the reality of a life extinguished in the name of duty, their shock underscores a universal truth: that behind the machinery of conflict lie human stories filled with dreams, fears, and losses. In remembering such moments, we are called to honor those who served, to acknowledge the shared humanity that persists even amidst the chaos of battle, and to carry forward the lessons of compassion and understanding. The past remains a vital teacher, reminding us that in our quest for peace, we must seek to understand the full weight of our history, embracing the responsibility to foster dialogue and reconciliation in a world still shaped by the shadows of conflict.